today we're going to be talking around a conversation that connects the global commitments made at the recent United Nations Ocean Conference, or UNOC 3, to the work that we do locally to foster ocean literacy and inspire action. So joining us today, we have Dr. Judy Mann, who is a strategy executive at the Two Oceans Aquarium Foundation and president of the International Zoo Educators Association. And then, of course, we've got Professor Mike Bruton, who has had a distinguished career in aquatic biodiversity and science education. We're also joined by Bischoff, who is an environmental journalist, and he'll be adding some valuable input into the conversation. So over to you, Mike.
Right, thanks, Sidley, and welcome to Judy and Chris. Great for everyone who's joining this conversation. I think the key thing on everyone's mind is, was UNOC just another meeting of talk, or was it something that produced outcomes, agreements, etc., that are likely to be implemented and practical to be implemented? It was unquestionably an extremely important conference because, as we all know, conservation has to a large extent focused on what's happening on land rather than what's happening at sea, despite the fact that all major ecological processes on the planet start in or over the oceans. So life on land is utterly dependent on the health of the sea. The other point, of course, is that the biome in the ocean is vastly greater than that on land, and the great majority of animals live there. So although we are landlubbers, we have an obligation to look after the oceans. So let me start by asking Judy, what is your overall impression of UNOC 3 and the outcomes from that conference?
If I had to take UNOC 3 as a conference, it served multiple purposes. Whether all those purposes were worth what it cost to get everybody there from an environmental point of view and all the rest of it is a separate discussion altogether. So I think that something that I was very excited about with UNOC 3 is the fact that the world stage is starting to talk about the ocean. When I started in this field in 1992, 1990, people didn't think about the ocean. It was not a priority from a conservation or a research or a communication perspective. The ocean was fine. It was huge. We could take as much as we liked from it. We could dump as much as we wanted to into it, and it would just keep going. In the last 30 years, the science has shown us that that is absolutely not the case. The science has also shown us that a healthy ocean is absolutely vital for healthy humanity. It's as simple as that. So I think that those are some of the fundamental changes that have happened in the last 30, 40 years, and particularly actually in the last 10 years. So for me, UNOC 3 was a signpost that we are starting to take the ocean seriously, and that people need to stand up and take account. And the fact that there were so many world leaders there is great. I think it's a really important sign. The fact that there were so many scientists there, they had the special science sub-conference, there were so many NGOs there, community leaders, indigenous leaders. So leaders across the spectrum were there, and they were all talking about the ocean. So to me, that's an enormous win. The media generated through it, and with the help of Attenborough's film Ocean that coincided with it, has been phenomenal. So almost doesn't matter where you are, somebody is going to have mentioned the ocean somewhere, which wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. So to me, that groundswell, people are starting to talk the talk. Are we walking the walk? That's the big unknown. So UNOC 3 had several I think, achievements that were important. The ratification of the High Seas Treaty. We're now just 10 countries away from ratifying that, which means it can go into effect. The raising of the profile of the stopping subsidies for harmful illegal fishing is another important thing. Some of the moratorium on seabed mining coming through. So the big issues that are overarching global issues, it's raised profile, it's got a few more signatories, some big MPAs were proclaimed. So there were good things that came out of it. How much of that will translate into action in governments, in big companies, in the big fossil fuel world, etc., remains to be seen. But we're talking about it. So we are at that step one. And I think that overall people are starting to realize the value of the ocean and the importance of these decisions, because ultimately the decisions that our leaders are making right now may not influence our lives tremendously, but boy, they are going to influence the lives of our children and our grandchildren immeasurably. So we have to think very, very carefully now.
Thanks, Judy. And we not only have to think carefully, we have to act quickly, because time is short. And the science has shown that the oceans are in far worse shape than we thought previously. Chris, what was your overall impression of the outcome of UNOC 3?
Yeah, I think both yourself and Judy touched on some very important points. And for me, it's the very first thought that I normally have after these big global conferences is that there are a lot of promises and pledges and declarations that are made, and it was no different with UNOC, but it's how do we now translate that into impact? And I think that's the exciting part. We've seen, the ratification of the High Seas Treaty. There were, I think, announcements of 20 new marine protected areas, one of the biggest ones being in French Polynesia. And it's how do we realize these conversations, and translate that into impact, and what does that look like at a community level as well? We got to consider that the majority of the world's populations live within coastal communities, and we need fair representation of the smaller islands, which was part of the discussion as well. I mean, we have along our own coastlines many coastal communities that rely on our fisheries and the sustainable use of our fisheries and ocean resources. And so the conversations and the solutions need to be inclusive of that. And it was discussed to some extent at UNOC, and I think that's great. I think, there needs to be more conversation, or the momentum needs to continue beyond UNOC. There's a lot of awareness around the conversation right now, but where are we going to sit 3 months down the line?
Yes, I think a lot of the speakers ended with the comment that this is not the end of a process, it's the beginning of a process. All the agreements made and all the consensus reached now needs to be acted upon, and acted upon quickly. Before we go into specifics, I'd like to ask both of you the question, and it's a point that our Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment has made in a recent press release, Dr. George, and that is that South Africa has emerged as a thought leader in ocean conservation. And that came across quite strongly at UNOC 3. Do you have any comment on that, Judy?
I think being recognized as a thought leader is amazing, and it's certainly something that we should aspire to. I would love us to be recognized as an action leader.
Right. Yeah, I think the one goes with the other, but certainly, in terms of innovative approaches, innovative ways of communicating the urgency of the message to the general public and also to policymakers is part of being a thought leader as well, which will hopefully lead to action. What I detected at UNOC 3, where it differed from the previous two conferences, is that there was a lot of attention to the open ocean. In other words, those areas beyond marine protected areas, beyond exclusive economic zones, in other words, beyond where country jurisdiction applies to the open seas. And that's extremely important. That's about 2/3 of the ocean is outside of formally protected areas. And of course, that includes the bias we have of considering the ocean as a two-dimensional environment, whereas it is in fact a three-dimensional environment. We talk about 2/3 of the earth being covered by the ocean, but what we forget is that 95% of the habitable volume on the planet is in the oceans. And it's that three-dimensional volume that we are looking after. Judy, do you think that the conference went far enough in terms of the High Seas Treaty and the protection of the ocean beyond countries' jurisdictions?
So the High Seas Treaty is a vital treaty, and it's something that has been on the cards for a long time. The fact that we still need 10 countries to ratify it is a bit of a concern at the end of a conference like UNOC, because that was the ideal time for countries to ratify. So South Africa has signed the treaty. I think if South Africa could ratify the treaty as the next step, that would be an amazing next step forward. And then we'd only need 9 more to ratify it for it to become something that is actually enforceable. So I think that great progress was made, but we do need those next 10 signatories or those next 10 ratifications to get it over the line. But the implications for better ocean management are enormous if we can get this through. So it would be really, really sad if it got stuck at 10 to go for a long time. So if we could get those next 10 through, those ratifications through, then we'd be starting to really make progress.
Yeah, of course, the treaty we're talking about is the Biodiversity Beyond Natural Jurisdiction Treaty, which is part of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and is called the High Seas Treaty. Chris, what's your take on that issue?
Yeah, look, 10 doesn't sound like a lot, and I remember, Judy, you alluded to this, that there's it's encouraging to see a lot of media attention on this, and I think it's super great. And the media sentiment towards the ratification of the High Seas Treaty and reaching 60 is generally very positive. But I got to ask the question: how hard or how easy is it going to be to get those remaining 10? And it's kind of left me sitting on the edge of my seat, because we absolutely need this binding international law. I was listening to a podcast the other day that's basically they alluded to how our oceans are not well protected. Our international waters currently are not well protected or not protected enough, and we do need some sort of international agreement like the High Seas Treaty. So I am on the edge of my seat, and I hope we reach that 60.
Yeah, to me, the Open Seas Treaty is similar to the Antarctic Treaty, of which South Africa, of course, was one of the original signatories. And the Antarctic Treaty is, I think, one of the rare examples of the nations of the world really working well together to enforce a treaty that has ensured that the Antarctic remains relatively well protected. But as with all these international treaties, there are always so-called rogue nations who just ignore them. For diplomatic reasons, we can't mention who they are, but that is an issue. How does one deal with nations who either don't sign or don't adhere to the international agreements that are made, for instance, on ocean conservation? Judy?
When we look at any form of environmental protection, there is always going to be those that embrace it and will obey the laws, whatever they happen to be. And there's always going to be those rogue nations that don't. I think that one of the challenges we've got to have is build up enough countries that support it, that understand why the legislation is there, so that the enforcement happens on the water, because that's where the enforcement is going to have to happen. It's not going to be, it's going to be very difficult for enforcement to happen from land. Okay, there are vessel monitoring systems and all the rest of it, but we need it's almost like a self-policing system where countries that have ratified, that do buy into it, that agree with it, are going to have to do a lot of work themselves. out there on the water. And that's from a global scale. It takes it all the way down to whether it's your local marine protected area. So we need that groundswell of people that support local marine protected areas and that help to keep those protected areas protected, because there's never going to be enough money to have enforcement officials everywhere. So somehow we need to connect with society in a way that they believe that this is the right thing to do, not just for now, but into the future. So that's where we come to that, going all the way from the top down. We need the governments, we need the legislation, we need the systems in place, but then we need to start building that groundswell of support of an ocean literate and caring community who know what the ocean does for them, who know what they can do for the ocean, and who are working towards an ocean for the future.
Yeah, those are very good points. To me, one of the hallmarks of marine science research is how international it is. And every research cruise, at least in the last few decades, always has an international crew. There's a tremendous amount of collaboration, especially in this information age. And what we need to do is convert that internationality of research into internationality of conservation and policy implementation. Chris, what's your view on the Rogue Nation issue?
Yeah, so it's a very difficult question, and so I think that it can't halt progress. My opinion is that we need to push for more private sector involvement. Look at the big companies that are using marine resources, fisheries, and so we do need private sector involvement as much as possible. I think for that to happen is, we need ocean data, and so that needs to paint the picture of progress on different interventions and how they are working, for the protection of marine protected areas and the high seas. So ocean research, collecting as much ocean data and also translating that into measurable progress that can be understood by multitudes of stakeholders, and using that to create more buy-in from the private sector. I think that's what we need. I think, the political landscape in terms of representation at these conferences is always going to be a challenge. There will always be these rogue nations. I think it's just the nature of how the world works. So yeah, I think we need to be looking beyond just government and mobilizing, as the intention of UNOC was, multiple actors to be involved in ocean conservation and the future of our ocean.
Now to move on to specifics, marine protected areas, MPAs, received a lot of attention at this conference. And I think South Africa's standing in this regard is very high worldwide. We have recently proclaimed a large number of MPAs. Judy, what is your feeling? Did MPAs get a lot of attention, and was it productive?
So, Mike, I think that the discussions and the conversations around marine protected areas was probably one of the highlights for me of UNOC. And from the scientists through to government leaders, people are all starting to see the evidence of marine protected areas, both in their role for conservation of biodiversity, but also importantly in their role for protecting people's resources. So I think that those two functions, MPAs for people and for biodiversity in the ocean, are absolutely intrinsically linked. And I think that the timing of the ocean film by Attenborough, I've mentioned it before, was really good because it gave people a visual. So often the problem with the ocean is that we've got this blue blanket that covers it, and it's really hard for people to see what's beneath that blanket of water. And through aquariums, through good exhibits, through ocean film, people can suddenly go beneath the water. And I think that some of the images in that film helped to really, firstly, they were shocking, but also they showed the hope of marine protected areas, and they showed what marine protected areas can do. And they spoke about it from just a people point of view as well as from a biodiversity point of view. So for me, the whole discussion around marine protected areas is probably one of the most positive sides. And it's something that it's almost an idea that's been building. And I'm incredibly proud of South Africa. When we proclaimed our new marine protected areas in 2019, I think it was, we went from 0.3% up to 5%. And that was a huge jump. And there are very few countries that have actually done that. So we do have incredible 41 marine protected areas in our EEZ around mainland South Africa. And that's great. What we do need to do, though, is keep going with the management of those marine protected areas so that they don't become paper parks, and the same with global marine protected areas. So about 8.3% of the world's ocean, 8.3% of the world's ocean is in marine protected areas, and of that, only about 2.8% is actually properly protected. In some marine protected areas internationally, you can trawl, etc. Whereas our South African marine protected areas, we've got about 5.4% and 3% are properly protected, but you can't trawl in any of our MPAs. So we actually have some very good marine protected area legislation, and I'm proud, very proud of what South African scientists, our South African government, and the South African community has done for MPAs.
Yes, and we can also proudly claim to have the oldest marine reserve in Africa, the Tsitsikamma Reserve. And another important thing that came across to me is how research has revealed the positive impact of MPAs beyond the border of the MPA, to promote recruitment and allow restocking of exploited areas in the vicinity. So their impact stretches far beyond their proclaimed borders. Chris, your feeling about MPAs as UNOC 3?
Yeah, so I mean, I share the sentiments. I think it's very, very encouraging. It was really great to see the announcement of, I stand to be corrected, 20 new MPAs, and especially within the smaller island regions. I think it's also very encouraging, reading some of the literature where South Africa currently stands on our MPAs with 5.4% protected. And I think with that being said, beyond the ecological function or purpose of these MPAs is, I remember us having a conversation around they should be viewed as classrooms, or living classrooms that can, teach citizens the function of ocean life and the role of ocean life. And I think that's incredibly important, So that's also something to keep in mind, is once again making that ocean science and literature accessible. So it's very encouraging.
Yes, of course, some of the MPAs are offshore, difficult for the general public to reach, but those that are along our coast, I've always regarded the intertidal zone as the ultimate classroom, and we have many coastal MPAs that can be used in that way. To move on to another topic, one of the slight disappointments from the conference is that an international agreement could not be reached on the control of deep sea mining. Judy, do you have any comment on that?
The deep sea mining, I think, is one of the most incredibly potentially destructive threats that we're facing, and we haven't even mapped the deep sea. We don't know what's down there, and I think that we are about, if we don't put a moratorium on deep sea mining, we are tinkering with the very system that runs our planet. So I think that is an enormous disappointment, and we really have to ramp up the efforts to get that deep sea mining moratorium in place. We are fiddling with a system we don't understand. I often say it's like taking an aquarium and we're saying, well, let's just take out this pump, or let's just take out this filter. Let's just take out these nuts and bolts and see what happens. By the time it's crashed, it's too late. You can't go back and say, oh, we're going to fix it. These are systems we don't even understand yet. So for me, getting that moratorium on deep sea mining is absolutely vital for the future of our planet.
Yeah, I was involved in one of the EIAs for deep sea mining, and I made the point that we need to remember that marine organisms have completely different sensory systems to ours. We tend to sort of think of marine organisms in terms of our abilities, but they have much more acute hearing and vibration detection and other senses which would be greatly affected by deep sea mining activities. I think we tend to underestimate those impacts. Chris, what's your take on this?
Yeah, look, I mean, you raise a very important point, and it's like we just don't know enough of the deep sea floor, and a lot of conversation was around this precautionary principle and this precautionary approach, and it alludes to that, if in the lack of full knowledge or scientific evidence of the impact of something, it just shouldn't be followed through. There was also conversations around noise pollution. So these studies are very comprehensive, from marine biology to noise pollution to drilling to the economic viability studies. It's something that really needs to be researched and considered.
I was going to add to that. So Mike, you raised the biology of these animals, and I think that what we find very difficult to understand is timescales. These animals that are living in those deep, deep, deep areas, they've got a very, very, very slow metabolism. They're used to living under incredible pressure. So we can come in a month or a week and destroy something that has taken millions of years to grow up and to develop. So I think that concept of time is something we need to consider, is that this is a really slow place to live. And the damage, you can't just say, oh, well, it'll grow back. You don't grow back thousands of years of growth in a short space of time. So I think that concept of time with the deep sea is really important.
And I think in considering all of these impacts, we need to remember that the way that evolution by natural selection works is through an organism co-evolving with its environment. So it's only well adapted to the environments with which it co-evolved. It's not necessarily well adapted to future environments which may be perturbed by humans in the short term and suddenly create an animal that's no longer well adapted and able to thrive and breed. Judy, you're very, very well known in this field, and you've often said that interpretation education can shape policy and public perception. Could you share your views on the importance of educators and communicators and public facilities like Aquarium in terms of impacting not only the actions and policies of politicians, but also the attitudes of the general public?
Mm-hmm. So obviously the world of ocean communication and interpretation has been something that's been incredibly close to my heart for my whole career. I truly believe that it's our role to reveal the world of the ocean and connect people to it in a way that they feel inspired to care. And my journey over time has taken me away from knowledge and more to inspiration and heart. So while I started off my career believing that if people only knew more, then they would care more, now I'm turning it around and I'm looking at how can we inspire people to care more so that they want to learn more. So it's been an interesting journey. The United Nations, through their Ocean Decade, has something called 10 working groups or 10 challenges, and each of those 10 challenges pertains to a different challenge facing the ocean. And I've been part of Working Group 10, and Working Group 10's focus has been on enhancing humanity's relationship with the ocean. And there we've tried to take a very holistic view, because there are some communities that are incredibly connected to the ocean. There are some communities that are completely disconnected from the ocean. But we need to work with both of those communities, and especially with the communities that are disconnected from the ocean. So exploring ways to enhance ocean connection, exploring ways to enhance ocean literacy, and it doesn't matter what you call it, whether literacy is the right word or not, doesn't really matter. How do we inspire people to care for the ocean? And this is something that I think we can do in so many different ways. In South Africa, we've got the Marine and Coastal Educators Network, which is a network of people who connect and who care about the ocean and who are teaching about the ocean. We've got the aquariums, we've got museums, we've got science centers. We've got the Ocean Literacy Network that we started at the aquarium a few years ago, where we're exploring South African attitudes towards the oceans, South African knowledges about the ocean, and how can we best work together and how do we enhance that. We've got some workshops coming up at the next Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Symposium, where we're looking at the whole Western Indian Ocean side. So I am absolutely thrilled that marine education is suddenly becoming something that people want to do.
Something that I've introduced into my own work is something what I call the education information value chain. And basically what is said is it's no longer enough to just convey information to people, to fill their heads with new data, because data is so readily available. We've got to convert that information into knowledge, that knowledge into wisdom, and then that better understanding through wisdom needs to be translated into a changed mindset, which leads to changed behavior. And then the last step in the education information value chain is influencing others to change their mindset and behavior. Chris, what's your take on the importance of marine education?
In South Africa, and I mentioned it previously, and it's not unique to South Africa, but the environmental impact assessment process is a very important mechanism that enables, along with all these specialist studies and to evaluate the potential impacts on a proposed activity or development that has the potential to impact the ocean. That's an important mechanism that can enable the public to participate in that decision-making process. So that public participation process is an important mechanism for citizens. But you got to want people to participate, and that starts with caring about the ocean. And this is the important role that aquariums and science centers and museums play. They play a fundamental role in ocean education, and also just inspiring people to lead a life that is friendly on the ocean and make better decisions. And ultimately, a part of that is when they come up against something that they care about, that they would want to participate in something, in ocean protection in a way or another. So it plays a fundamental role.
And I think one of the wonderful innovations that's been introduced in terms of public participation in recent decades are so-called citizen science projects. And Judy, I think you have a fantastic example at the Two Oceans Aquarium in your turtle rehabilitation project. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about the importance of citizen science in that project.
Thanks, Mike. So the turtles, we've got 2 species of turtles that nest on our beaches up in the KwaZulu-Natal, northern KwaZulu-Natal. And each summer, these little turtles hatch out, tiny, tiny little turtles, and they get washed into the current and they come zooting down past the south coast. And then often they get stranded around the southern Cape Coast. And these stranded turtles have very little chance of survival. In fact, no chance of survival at all if they stay on the beach. But around the southern Cape Coast, we have a network of volunteers who have been trained in how to find these little turtles, how to look after them and bring them to the Two Oceans Aquarium, where they are then cared for until they're ready to be released. Sometimes it takes a short pace of time, sometimes it takes a long time, until these little guys have got a much, much stronger body so that they can actually be released and survive, and they've got a better chance of survival out in the wild. The sad thing we see is that many of these young turtles are coming in, and at this size, they have already swallowed lots and lots and lots of plastic. And that's the scary thing, because we start to see that cold face in that cold, hard facts of what we're doing to the ocean. But I think it's a great example of a citizen science project where we've got a community of people around the coast who are all activated and participating in turtle rescues.
Yes, and I think the Two Oceans Aquarium and Formula D have formed a wonderful partnership where we've helped you to design a new turtle rehabilitation centre, which you're hoping to build in the near future. Sidley, perhaps you could comment on the important role that a company like Formula D plays in creating multimedia experiences and interactive displays that the public can engage in.
Yes. So, Formula D's worked quite closely with the Two Oceans Aquarium on developing this turtle care center, because we believe that design can act as a bridge, between data and emotion, and using tools like immersive storytelling, often helps people to not just learn about the ocean, but also care deeply about it. And so this talks to the emotional and behavioral power of experiential learning, which is, our speciality. I don't know, Judy, I know that you were quite involved in that project throughout all the phases. Perhaps you can just also share your take on how that experience was with Formula D.
So designing a new experience, a new exhibit is always an incredible privilege. I was privileged to be part of building uShaka, see Marine World in Durban, and to see the ideas take shape, become reality, and then impact on people is an incredible privilege. And it was amazing to work with Formula D because we had a whole lot of different ideas. And when you sit around the table, everyone says, oh, we should put in this, we should put in this. What about this? This would look really cool. And you have to take all of those ideas. And that's what Formula D's skill is in taking a disparate set of ideas and turning it into something that is not only visually beautiful, but that is functional and that has a call to action. Because ultimately, we need every single person who leaves that turtle rehabilitation center to feel empowered to act. When we look at the big picture environmentally, it can sometimes often be very, very disempowering and depressing, to be honest. And we need to help people overcome that. And I think that the ideas that Formula D have come up with are certainly going to empower people and leave them with a sense of this is what I can do. And more importantly, this is what I will do.
People don't realize just how creative the developers of displays in aquaria and science centers and museums are. And that's where I think Formula D really has a powerful team of innovators and creatives coming up with new ideas on how to demystify complex topics and make them understandable to the general public.
You can, on an individual level, you can see what happens to a person when they have that deeply enriching experience. I've taken my son to the aquarium multiple times, and it's I can see that shift in him, and it's absolutely amazing. And people need those. We need people to have those experiences, that when they walk away from it, it's not just memorable, it's inspirational enough for them to go, what am I doing at home? How could I look at my waste habits differently? How can I look at my seafood choices differently? And it really shifts the fundamental thought process.
Now, one of the new ideas, which Judy, I believe you and the Two Oceans Aquarium have been intimately involved in, is that the declaration of an MPA Day, Marine Protected Areas Day, on the 1st of August. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about this. What is the objective and how is the organization of that going?
So way back in 2021, we were trying to work out how we could inspire more people to learn about marine protected areas, to find out about marine protected areas. And that was driven from a survey that we did at uShaka SeaWorld, where we found that more than 80% of our visitors could not name one marine protected area in South Africa. So although we in the science community think marine protected areas are a concept that people know about, outside the science community, very people knew that we actually had these protected areas in the ocean. South Africans are familiar with terrestrial protected areas, but not with marine protected areas. So that was really some of the impetus for creating the world's first Marine Protected Areas Day. So we launched it in the middle of COVID on the 1st of August 2021. And since then, it's grown amazingly. This year, we're going to be celebrating in about 28 to 30 different countries. We have Sylvia Earle's Mission Blue community on board with her Hope Spots, their Hope Spots. We have activities around the whole of South Africa, from Sodwana Bay all the way down through into Cape Town. We have international events happening around the whole world. We've got a new website that we're launching. And really the goal of Marine Protected Areas Day is to inspire action on the ground in our marine protected areas, to get people into those marine protected areas and to help build support and community around those MPAs.
Chris, as we know, just about every day we commemorate something. The UN has days it declares, etc. But this MPA day seems to be a very significant one. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, I think I mean it plays a really important role in educating people. I think I'm so happy to hear that there is an MPA day. I mean, I can tell you a story. Like I've had a very close ocean a relationship to the ocean over my entire life. You know, I've surfed my entire life, and I've witnessed the coral reef pretty much being destroyed, and you know, I've traveled back to a specific location, and you know, the reef and the landscape had significantly changed over a 3-year timeline, and it was really scary to me. And that was one of the big moments for me to say, this is really important. We need to be protecting our waters and our coastlines and our, you know, our seas. And so the urgency of or the importance of these marine protected areas it's massive.
I'd like to end by asking each one of you, what is the most important message that you want to convey to our listeners with regard to the outcomes of the UNOC 3 conference and ocean conservation in general? Judy?
So I think that the biggest message is that the ocean is there. It supports our life, and we need to take care of it. Whatever that means, nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something. Start local, even if it's as simple as sharing a social media post, talking to somebody you know about the ocean. Start small and build up from there. Everyone can do something. What are your skills? What are you passionate about? And how can you use that for the ocean? Because if everyone thought like that, we would have that groundswell of support, and we would have actions for the ocean.
I think my take-home message to the public is, you know, one of the goals at UNOC 3 is the 30 by 30 target of conserving 30% of the world's marine and coastal areas by 2030. So, you know, this has inspired global action, and with platforms like UNOC, often we are, you know, talking to the converted, but we know that there's still many challenges that remain. So I would just like everyone that's listening to this, just to think about, you know, in your country, in your community, in your sector, you know, what do you think is the biggest barrier to protecting marine ecosystems, and what can you do to overcome that by spreading awareness, you know, and exposing people within your community to those messages that they need to hear.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful message, because people tend to think that what I individually can do is so small it won't make a difference. But when you multiply that up a few 100 million times, then it certainly does make a difference. Chris, what's your take-home message?
Yeah, look, I think you've all said it already, and I think, you know, Judy mentioned it earlier. It's very easy to get overwhelmed at the bigger picture when we speak about climate change and you know, the unsustainable use of our ocean. But start at the individual level. You know, contextualize the situation at a local level. You know, spend a bit of time reading about local initiatives and local establishments for ocean protection, and get involved. I think it's fun. The ocean's a beautiful place, and there's so much to learn. You know, it can even start within your own home. You know, better waste management practices, seafood choices, as I mentioned. And it all starts with educating yourself a bit. So taking a little bit of time to read the outcomes of UNOC, or watch a podcast, or watch David Attenborough's latest film. I think that's a very inspirational thing. So that's my recommendations.
And I agree with you. Don't watch Attenborough's film just once. Watch it several times, because each time you watch it, you'll get more inspiring messages out of it. Well, my take-home message is never stop learning. And although I'm now into my late 70s, nothing gives me greater pleasure than to continue to learn about the oceans, the creatures that live in it. And I've spent a lot of time the last few years preparing illustrated talks on different animal groups. And at the moment, I'm preparing talks on echinoderms and crustaceans and corals and jellyfish and so on. So I can share my fascination and my sense of wonder for the ocean, and for the people who haven't had the privilege, to dive and spend time underwater. So my take-home message is never stop learning. Use every method you have, because it'll be a very, very rewarding experience. Well, it remains for me to thank all of you, Sidley, Judy, Chris, for contributing. I think it's been a very inspiring discussion, and I hope it's the first of many.